Welcome to the Skeptic Zone, the podcast from Australia for science and reason.
Yes, it's the Skeptic Zone podcast, episode number 742 for the 25th of December 2022. Richard Saunders coming to you from a very frozen over North America. Wow, the bit I'm in California is not so bad, but I know many people around this country and up into Canada and other parts of the world are suffering from blizzards and amazing storms, and the TV news footage is just amazing at the moment. So I don't know. What can I say? Stay safe, stay warm if you can. Coming up on this week's show, part 2 of my interview, my chat with Dr. Eugenie Scott. This week, Jeannie and I talk about the ancient apocalypse, so-called TV documentary on Netflix, and Jeannie gives us her thoughts about debating creationists and other pseudoscientists. Coming up after that, it's the story of the dog who ate the homework. Well, not exactly the homework, but a dog ate something it really shouldn't have eaten. You'll find out what that is coming up. And Adrienne also talks to a friend of ours, Faith Newsome Rodriguez, about woo for animals. Is it good to give animals a gluten-free diet? What? Or maybe, can cannabis help animals? This is all very strange. You'll find out the connection and why it all ties together with earrings coming up when we can count on Adrienne with Adrienne Hill. Then to round off the show, I dip back into the Trove archives and look for references in the Australian newspapers to the paranormal and San Francisco, since I'm in the area. But that's all from me at the moment. It's time for me to walk into the kitchen and see if I can find some lovely cookies as baked by Dr. Eugenie Scott. While I do that, I hope you enjoy this Christmas edition of the Skeptic Zone. Let's move on briefly. You and I, we really take one for science, Jeannie. We did, so you don't have to. So last night, you and I sat on the couch.
Two episodes.
2 episodes of Ancient Apocalypse.
We could have done it in 15 minutes, but we watched 2 full episodes. Go us.
We had a stiff drink and some cookies to gird us.
Lots of cookies. It's Christmas.
Very nice cookies, by the way.
Thank
delicious. Yeah, I've been helping you bake them. Yeah. Lovely cookies. I've been cooking them. Well, I've been rolling them out into shapes and then eating them.
Baking is the technical term is baking. I see you spend a lot of time in the kitchen.
We do. And we made the joke that there's a cookie tin. And no matter how many cookies we put into it, it gets less and less and less. We sort of figure there's a wormhole to another dimension or something.
It's the cookie tin version of a black hole.
It is.
Things go in and never come out again,
it was something like that. Anyway, so let's get back to this bizarre Netflix documentary, Ancient Apocalypse. And we watched 2 episodes and, we were just gobsmacked. And then we're laughing and then we're going, hang on a second, and, it was something else.
Alternate humor and rage.
And for those of you who haven't seen it, don't. But I mean, if you want to. But the whole premise is this guy, Graham Hancock has an idea that in the last ice age, there was some sort of race of, he hasn't said who exactly, superhumans or super intelligent humans roaming around the world teaching ancients how to build pyramids and other things.
Yeah, they're the culture heroes, as we'd say in the anthropology biz, who would teach them how to grow food and domesticate animals and build, because of course, primitive humans are just too stupid to learn how to do that themselves, or to learn it from others or whatever. So they had to have these advanced individuals come and teach them.
It's another version of Van Daniken, ancient gods, ancient aliens.
Yep, rinse and repeat. It's not, and this is one reason why we were giggling so much, because there wasn't a whole lot there that was new to us.
We've heard all this before, and it only occurred to me this morning after thinking about it that he's doing the classic thing of starting with the premise and looking for evidence to support it, which is, of course, you're going to find evidence to support your premise if you look hard enough and cherry pick.
And particularly if you avoid all the evidence that discredits your view, which is, that's why this reminds me so much of creationism. But this is in a number of respects more pernicious, but which we can get to. But, one of the things that I was talking to an archaeologist last week, a fellow by the name of John Hoops, who teaches at the University of Kansas, and you should interview him. I hope you put him on your show in the future, because he's a real interesting guy, and he's made a study of this pseudo-archaeology, and he's been studying it for years. And he pointed out to me that Graham Hancock has in I think it's a TED Talk or some similar performance, admitted that he used to be a very heavy marijuana smoker, but he has switched to ayahuasca because that gives you even bigger insights. Ooh. So, which I find very interesting, because he takes great pride in pointing out, and we saw it on the first two episodes, that, well, no, I'm not an archaeologist. I'm not a scientist. I'm a journalist. Well, of course, there's a lot of journalists who would say, oh, yeah? That's not how you do journalism either. But his, and John Hoops was pointing out that his is really a metaphysical view. It is a view, metaphysical covers a lot of territory, but it's a view that is not based and doesn't claim to be based or require to be based in any kind of empirical or logical or rational source. Metaphysical in the sense of going off on an ayahuasca trip, right? He sees things. And like you were saying, he sees things, he sees reality in a way that, other people can't see. And then he goes out and cherry picks any kind of empirical or observational evidence that he gets, and so that he can hold up and say, see, this is,
It all makes sense. It all makes sense to him. Now, I've got in front of me here, and I'll quote a little bit of this. This is an open letter from the Society for American Archaeology, and it's directed to the networks, who Netflix and ITN, the producers of this. And I won't read the whole letter because it's a little lengthy, but the three points that they make here: we have three principal concerns with regard to ancient apocalypse. 1, the host of the series repeatedly and vigorously dismisses archaeologists and the practice of archaeology with aggressive rhetoric, willfully seeking to cause harm to our membership and our profession in the public eye. 2, Netflix identifies and advertises the series as a docu-series, a genre that implies its content is grounded in fact when the content of the show is based on false claims about archaeologists and archaeology. And 3, the theory it presents has long-standing association with racist, white supremacist ideologies, does injustice to Indigenous peoples, and emboldens extremists. Them's fighting words.
Them's fighting. Well, them is descriptive words, alas. And this, you mentioned Van Daniken. I mean, this whole assumption that primitive people, I trust you heard the quotation marks around primitive. Yes. That primitive people.
So-called.
Hunter-gatherers or village horticulturalists, people who are not, urban Western city dwellers, are, could not possibly have built the pyramids, and the pyramids are all over the world, of course, not just not just Giza, but also in Mesoamerica.
That's definite proof of a connection.
Oh, yeah. That's another one.
That's another one. Yeah,
the pattern recognition when you don't actually have patterns.
Whereas I said to you, we were watching the show, and I said, your granddaughter, who's all of 3, was it 3?
She's pushing 3. She'll be 3 next month.
She can make pyramids. This is not, I mean, I'm not belittling pyramids. I think they're incredible ancient structures, but the whole concept it occurs to just about every child to put things on top of other things like that.
Yeah, it's not hard to imagine why you find pyramids on almost every continent. You get them in North America, South America, Mesoamerica, Asia, etc.
It's a logical way to build up things.
Bingo, right. Especially if you don't, you can build a lot taller stuff if you build them in a pyramidal structure than if you have to invent steel to make a skyscraper. They didn't have the technology to make skyscrapers, but everybody, including a 3-year-old, has the technology to make a pyramid. This is not belittling them.
No.
But the comments there from the SAA letter about the inherent racism, assuming that let's face it, the major civilizations that sort of went around exploring the world in the 1400s were European ones.
Yeah.
Basically, people who are pale like us. So white folks, if you're not a white person, you couldn't possibly have the ability to erect complicated buildings, systems of moving water around, systems of moving people around, not
and we get back to ancient aliens. This is the whole idea that the ancient peoples from no matter where they were, no matter what color, what part of the world, were visited by kind aliens who said, "Try this, use this device."
And we saw echoes of that even in the second episode. And we didn't see any more, but I'm sure this is. We predict. We cannot state for sure because we don't have empirical evidence. We predict that episodes 3 through 8 will hit on this more, but. It will be interesting to see if he actually does bring up the ancient aliens piece of it.
Yeah.
Because according to John Hoops, the archaeologist I mentioned, he's been who's really quite a student of Graham Hancock. I've learned a lot. Hancock has been kind of downplaying the ancient aliens connection. It does make him sound a little bit more of a nutcase.
And it would make him sound dated, old-fashioned.
Perhaps also, yeah. By the way, what did you think of the? I don't know if you were paying attention, but the production qualities of the programs we watched last night.
It was. I was paying particular attention to that, and it's a flashy production, high quality visual graphics, grabbing music, drone footage. All that is just lipstick on a pig. Is that the expression or something like that? I mean, it makes for a good production, but so what?
Production values are great.
Yeah.
They've got these fast cuts from one site to another.
Well, they poured Netflix
zooming in, zooming out on the faces, and
they've poured money into it. Netflix has poured money because apart from anything, if something is going to be a hit on Netflix, they've got certain standards.
Did Netflix make this, or are they just showing it?
I don't.
We could find out.
We could find out, one or the other. But regardless, I was paying careful attention to that. So they did have some serious money and production behind that. But again, so what? It doesn't mean that makes it any more credible. Yeah.
If content is what's important to you, and that's your listeners certainly. I mean, if you're saying nonsense, it doesn't matter how pretty it is. That's your lipstick on a pig, right?
The lipstick on a pig. Yes. Now, before we go, one of the things that I've always found interesting about this, we're getting back to the creationists, so maybe this guy too, the ancient apocalypse and the super people, whoever they were of the last ice age.
Yeah, you got to know. You should do we should do another program on this.
Well, we should. When it comes to confronting these people in, let's say, a debate, debating creationists, the old thing, the scientist fronting up, thinking, "I'm going to debate this creationist and win."
Sigh. There's a difference between answering the claims and debate. Okay, debate is a sport. Debate is a specific kind of interaction.
Yeah.
Which should be avoided by people on our side of this issue. Not because we don't have the correct information, but because the format of a debate is not one in which we are accomplishing our goals.
Yeah, I agree.
mean, our goals are to help the public understand why our position is the one that's supported by science and by empirical evidence and by logic, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And you cannot do this in going on the Joe Rogan show and debating Hancock,
It's not gonna work.
which he's trying very hard to get people to do, by the way.
Yeah.
The reason for that are many. For one, it confuses the public about how scientists actually make up their minds about issues, how a consensus is achieved. I have been to a lot of science conferences, believe me, more than most human beings should. And I have never, ever, in any scientific discipline whatsoever, mine or any other discipline, witnessed a situation where a scientist was on one side of the stage and another scientist was on the other side of the stage, and they debated their scientific position and then took a vote at the end as to who won. That's not how you do it. What you do is you go to meetings and you give papers and you discuss with your colleagues and you try to persuade them that your point of view is really the superior one and it's supported by the evidence, and then you write papers for publication, and that's another way of trying to persuade your colleagues that your ideas are superior to those of others. And after a period of time, everybody comes around and says, yeah, Richard's really got something there. I think that's the way ABC works. Mm-hmm. And so, well, that's the Australian broadcaster, but that's, I think that's,
I know what you mean.
I think that's the way XYZ works.
Yes.
And so, standing up there on a stage, talking past one another is not how we do science anyway. So you're not accomplishing your goal that way. You're also not accomplishing your goal because the format of a debate disadvantages you in another way. It's much easier to say, X is false, Y is false, Z is false, than it is to say, no, X is true, and here's why.
Yeah, of course.
Y is true, and here's why. Z is true, and here's why. Yeah. It takes a lot longer to explain an empirically supported position than it does to say, doesn't work. And the position that we are in a creation evolution debate or, these archaeology debates is the same sort of thing. The other opportunity, of course, is that your opponent can say X, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I are all wrong. And you only have time to say, okay, here's why A is wrong, and here's why A is actually right, and here's why he's wrong about his statement about B. It's called the Gish Gallop.
It was running around my head. I was about to say it. Gish Galloping, for those of you who don't know.
Named after our beloved Dwayne Gish from the Institute for Creation Research. Yeah. Rest in peace.
In other words, just blurt out as much stuff you can in 5 minutes, and your opponent can't possibly have the time to refute everything.
Which results in a very interesting psychological phenomenon called the residual effect, which is that it's not a classic, it's not formal, but what that means is that the audience member goes away saying, okay, I guess the creationist was wrong about A and B and C, but he was probably right about D, E, F, and G because I didn't hear any refutations about that.
Yeah.
Okay. And you don't have time because it's a limited time format. Yeah. That's why you do not debate, because it doesn't accomplish your goals. Now, unfortunately, there have been in the past evolutionists whose goal was to just prove their mental superiority. They're in it for the ego, and they just want to hammer that silly creationist to the floor. Can you find, go argue sports or something. Debate something else. All right, get out of my field. I don't need you. Mm-hmm. You're not helping. You are positively hindering, because there are more people who are going to go away with the feeling that your opponent is correct than will go away feeling that you're correct. Yeah. And we have empirical evidence on that. I wrote an article a number of years ago, in the 90s actually, in the Creation Evolution Journal. If any of your readers are interested in why, additional reasons why one should not debate, the article is called Debates and the Globetrotters. And if you just do debates, Globetrotters, Eugenie, it should pop up. All right. There aren't a lot of Eugenies. If I search for Eugenie, I often get my stuff. It works out really well.
There we are. Sound advice, folks, from Eugenie Scott. Look, if you have to watch Ancient Apocalypse, go for it. Watch it. But
it's good education
it is
for
good
you
education.
as a skeptic to understand what the opposition is.
It's one of the things people say, have you seen this, this, and this, and this? And I often say, well, yes, I have, but it's a real chore. It is a chore.
It's unpleasant.
Yeah, however, Ancient Apocalypse is the name of the show. I'm not recommending it, but from an educational point of view, if you want to, you can check it out and then go online to see all the rebuttals, which there are many.
And in all seriousness, it behooves a skeptic to watch at least an episode or two, because it gives you credibility. One of the things that we are always saying to people is that you need to find out about a topic. I will not say do your own research, because that's become a trope, but you do need to. You don't just reject out of hand. If you are a right-thinking, if you will, skeptic, what you want to do is say, that sounds odd. Let me look into it.
Yeah.
And this is looking into it.
And this is exactly why I go every year, every 6 months, to the Mind, Body, Spirit festivals. I mean, I need to be able to say, well, I've gone and had a look. I know what they're talking about. I've seen this. I've had this demonstrated on me. I've got a library at home full of books of paranormal and endless DVDs on UFOs. And I've watched them. I should be certified, but I've watched them. Jeannie Scott, what a pleasure it is. Thank you so much for looking after me for a few days and cooking those wonderful cookies.
Well, come back and I'll teach you how to make pressed cookies.
Ooh.
That's a new technique that you haven't experienced yet. You're pretty good at rolled cookies, so I'll give you that.
High praise indeed. Thank you, Jeannie.
Hey, Adrienne.
Hi, Susan. Out for some shopping, eh?
Yep, I'm stocking up on this imitation maple syrup from Australia.
Imitation? Imitation? No. You need to buy the real thing from Canada.
But I saw the TV commercial, and it said that noted pancake-eating expert Richard Saunders says it's the best maple syrup money can buy, and 60% of people preferred it in a blind taste test. Everyone knows it's the best.
Oh, come on, Susan. You know better than that. That's the argument from authority.
It is?
Or is it the argument from popularity? It might be another logical fallacy. I'm not sure.
Really? If only we had a way of finding out.
Hello, everyone.
Oh my, it's the skeptical fairy godmother angel from the internet.
Yes, that's right. But how did you know who I am?
I listened to the Skeptic Zone podcast. Also, didn't you used to be the tooth fairy?
Oh, yes. I remember you. I'll never forget your left upper lateral incisor. Would you like it back?
No, it's okay. You keep it.
Hey, skeptical fairy godmother angel, what are you doing here in the supermarket?
I've come to tell you that you can find out about 40 different logical fallacies on YouTube in one handy location. Listen to each one to hear an explanation and examples of how they might be used.
Oh.
Just go to tinyurl.com/logicalzone and you'll find all the logical fallacies with Michelle Bickersma with handy time codes to get to the exact one you want.
Who is Michelle Bickersma?
Just a friend of mine.
tinyurl.com/logicalzone. Thank you, skeptical fairy godmother angel. I guess you'll disappear in a puff of smoke and thunder now, eh?
Not quite yet. I have a bit of shopping to do. Susan?
Yes?
Where do I find the Australian maple syrup?
What? No. Come with me, so-called skeptical fairy. This is real maple syrup from Canada. Made with real maple.
You can count on Adrienne with Adrienne Hill.
Hello everyone, this is Adrienne Hill from Canada to tell you about another misadventure I had this week. It seems that bad things maybe do happen in threes. 2 weeks ago, I reported I fell through the ice in the Rocky Mountains. Well, last week, I had to have a cracked tooth repaired. And this week, my dog Jewel decided she needed extra attention in the form of a vet visit. Now, I can reset the counter so I can confirm that bad things, or was it good things, happen in threes. So to give you a little background, Jewel is a very cute mini labradoodle who happens to be very particular about the food she eats, but for non-food items, anything goes. 4 years ago, the first year we had her, she ate Christmas lights off the tree. 5 of them. Plus the wire. We have not put up our tree since, and she has gained some infamy at the vets for doing this. As a result, we are pretty careful about what we leave within her reach. However, on the night of Monday, December 19th, that's Canada time, I was getting ready for bed and I heard her crunching on something. She was in the process of downing a very treasured pair of origami earrings made by our fearless leader, Richard Saunders, which I had placed on my rather large bedside table on the far side, away from the bed. The little turkey would have had to perform some gymnastics to get to them. Not sure why she didn't choose to eat the dental floss or other miscellaneous items that inhabit the table. Obviously, she prefers sharp, crunchy objects that warrant a vet visit. The vet confirmed via X-ray that the mangled wire hook was indeed in Jewel's stomach and heading into her colon. The suggested treatment? Give her extra fiber and hope that the earring doesn't get stuck on its way through her. No suggestion of homeopathy, acupuncture, chiropractor, CBD oil, etc. I feel pretty lucky to have found a chain of clinics that are essentially woo-free. However, I have had some questionable things suggested to me, and all I need to do is ask them, is it really effective? And they usually say probably not. And if they say, but what's the harm? It's worth a try. I reply, my pocketbook doesn't appreciate it, and they always laugh, leaving me with the feeling that they are used to saying these things to placate the owners more than anything. This event on things my dog likes to eat brought me back to when we first got her, and I was looking at the wide variety of treats and food made for pets. I saw the classic human food label of natural in large letters on most brands. There were vegetarian and vegan options, gluten-free and grain-free varieties, turmeric latte oven-baked dog treats that are made with real ingredients. I found turmeric curcumin bites that help with mobility, liver function, and skin health for only $53 Canadian for 90 treats. And, of course, there are multiple companies pushing probiotics of all kinds with little evidence to back up the many claims on each bottle. One by Pet Lab Co. on Amazon.ca claims that their products, quote, support gut health, itchy skin, seasonal allergies, and yeast with each tasty chew, end quote. I think they might want to look at rephrasing that. The ingredient that I was most surprised to find in pet products was the inclusion of CBD oil and other cannabis-related products. While cannabis products are now legal in Canada for humans, they are not yet legal for pets. According to the College of Veterinarians of Ontario, quote, currently there are no approved cannabis or CBD prescription drugs for animals, end quote. And as a result, veterinarians are not allowed to recommend or prescribe the products, at least not yet. However, you're going to find lots of products saying they contain these substances. I really wanted to investigate all these claims further, and I discovered that good information for pets is actually not very easy to find. I decided to ask my friend Faith Newsome Rodriguez from Raleigh, North Carolina, to help me do some research since I may have to go back to the vet if things take a turn for the worse with Jewel. Today I'm really excited. I have Faith Newsome Rodriguez with me here. I enlisted her help because I really wanted a cat person's perspective besides my doggy perspective. I've known her since trivia with Susan Gerbic's weekly trivia on Thursday night, and we stayed with her and Ramiro when we were visiting Raleigh when Susan Gerbic was doing a talk for the Triangle Area Skeptics. I was so happy she said yes to helping me out with this so we could do a little more of a deep dive than I could have done on my own. Faith, you found some really interesting things about some of the weird stuff I've seen in the pet stores. And one of them was about gluten intolerance in dogs and cats. Is gluten intolerance a thing in our animals or our pets?
And it isn't, actually, except for Irish setters. That's the only a breed of dog, and it's the only one that they found that actually has I forget what the term is. It's not quite like celiac disease in humans, but it's very similar.
Right.
And it's a genetic condition that they inherit. But as far as it being a thing in like the regular cats and regular dogs, it's not.
And yet we find a whole lot of food on the shelves that's marketed as gluten-free or grain-free. You noted another trend sort of related to the gluten-free, and that's the carbs, the carbohydrates, which is a very popular human trend with the keto diets and the paleo diets, etc. You also found that trend in the dog food, correct?
Yes, and with cat food as well. It's mostly marketed as wheat-free or grain-free foods. And what I did discover with that is that has piggybacked off a lot of recalls, particularly mold being in the wheat because of how it's stored. Then it gets in the dog food.
Right.
Because wheat is actually pretty vital in making dry kibble. If you don't have that carbohydrate, the kibble won't have a binding agent. So it crumbles, it falls apart. And so when there was the issue with mold getting in the wheat supply, particularly in China, because I guess regulations are a little bit more laxed over there, as well as the chemical.
It was like melamine or something like that, but that's not right.
Melamine. Mm-hmm.
Was it melamine?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. That happened in 2007.
Okay.
Alpha toxins from the mold, that was one thing. And then the melamine in 2007. And I think a couple hundred dogs died. And there was a huge amount of recalls from that. And so that kind of correlated with big name companies like Blue Buffalo got really popular at that time, which it was marketed as grain-free food. And what I noticed is even though it said it was grain-free, they were talking from a wheat standpoint.
Right.
Because there's a lot of byproduct like brewer's yeast that's used in the food. They got in trouble a couple years after that for not disclosing that they were using things like brewer's yeast and grains in their food, even though it wasn't coming from a wheat source.
Right. And from what I understand, you found that no carbs for cats can be a little tricky.
And I did try to look up to see if cats need carbohydrates, because there's this whole thing that cats are carnivores.
Right.
They're feline. Lions eat meat. Cats, therefore, logically should eat meat. But I found this big, huge macro study where they looked at it to see cats actually can digest carbs. It's not going to kill them. There's really no evidence to show that carbohydrates will hurt them. And I think why a lot of pet owners get into this debate about carbohydrates in food, I found myself jumping down this rabbit hole right around 2018 when my cat was diagnosed with chronic kidney disease. I was told, you need to put her on this special diet. And I started to read and research about, what is it I should feed my cat? And the vet told me, we have prescription diets for them. And so I started to look at what these prescription diets were. 1 in 3 cats are going to develop chronic kidney disease. It's just the nature of their body. Cats need high protein, and we know high protein diets, even in humans, can cause kidney dysfunction.
Right.
And when a cat, that's just what, my cat's 16, that's 80 in human years. So it's pretty much expected at this point in time, she's going to have some chronic issues. When I was doing the research, it turned out that these chronic kidney disease foods had rice in them, and they would have potatoes. There was one that my vet had given me that I could see little chunks of carrot. And I was just like, if cats aren't supposed to have this, why is this in here? And then I started to read that cats need lower protein diets because if they've already got kidney damage, they need to eat lower protein. The same thing with humans. So if you know somebody that has chronic kidney disease or is on dialysis, you'll notice that they have to eat low sodium, lower protein type foods to not damage their kidneys. And it's the same thing with cats.
Yeah, no, it's very interesting. Well, I'd like to talk next about one of the more curious things. When I first got my dog and I was walking around the pet food stores, and the number of products that had cannabis or cannabis-related products in them, like CBD oil or hemp, were everywhere. And I thought that was really interesting because that was around the time that Canada legalized all of this. And it was a very popular item just in human food to have some sort of, CBD oil was promoted to me as the cure-all for many things. And here we have CBD oil showing up in pet food. And you found some interesting things about it because I was wondering, are there even studies about CBD and pets, for example?
Yeah, and here in the United States, I haven't seen much in the way of cannabis products marketed towards pets. I haven't stepped in that many CBD stores, to be honest. So
yeah, well, here it's just the regular pet stores you see it. So
well, I mean, we have hemp. Like hemp here in North Carolina is legal, so you can get hemp products. There's one like a couple miles down the road from me, but
right.
I've never really walked in to see if this is available for cats or even dogs.
Right.
And I actually did look into that a little while ago because my cat, has chronic pain. She does have some anxiety issues. There's inappropriate urination, which comes with the territory when you have a kidney disease cat.
Right.
I kind of just got overwhelmed looking at it. Like my vet never even recommended it to me. But what I did find is when I actually started to look at this, companies that are selling this, I think it's Lola Pet. This is a couple that lives out in California that had their dog, their Chihuahua, had anxiety problems. And they gave the dog medication. They did all these other things. And then they decided to try cannabis because that's what they had. Their doctors were giving it to them. They tried it with the dog. Little red flags were going up that you're giving them the medication and the cannabis at the same time. How do you know
which it is?
It's not the medication working and this. But then they decided to market this product for pets. And they had a whole section telling you about cannabis use for cats. And they even admit that there are no research studies.
Right.
There's been no studies done in pets, or in this particular case, I think it was just specifically cats. But they did say in a couple places it's never been tested on animals if this works. But they're making these claims that it may enhance medicated effects of seizure medicine. It may have a calming or soothing effect. Nowhere here where they were showing me how they came to this conclusion.
Right.
But at the end of this, they linked all of these humans and studies. And I was checking with myself as I was reading this and thinking, if I didn't have the skeptical tools to kind of understand that just because you're showing me studies for humans does not translate to pets, I could easily see myself being swayed to like, oh, I'm going to put this in, my cart and I'm going to go buy this for my cat.
Well, exactly. And I think we found that the oral absorption of CBD is actually quite low in dogs and cats.
I think it was from Tufts, from their veterinary school.
Right.
They mentioned that basically the pet's body treats CBD as if it's a toxin. And so it's metabolized by the liver. So within 4 hours of giving it to them, the concentrations are so low that it doesn't make sense to give them. And one thing I learned with cats and their digestive systems, so cats use glucose as their main form of energy source, just as we as humans do, but they break glucose down from protein through glucogenesis in the liver. So if you are giving your cat cannabis and the body is treating it in the liver, and your cat is also trying to process its nutrients into glucose in the liver, it doesn't make sense to me why we would be straining that organ to get rid of a toxin while it's trying to nourish the body.
And I think the two things that CBD or any cannabis product is promoted to do is to fight pain and anxiety. Those are the two main things I think we found. Yeah. And I found some information on a blog that I discovered after I became a pet owner, and that is skeptvet.com. And he has been following some of the CBD research in relation to, I believe it's dogs' arthritis specifically. And in his early headlines, he was quite excited and saying that the early tests were encouraging, but was exercising caution because there were some flaws with the study. Quite often they were low numbers or not double-blinded. There were always something that he wasn't really happy with. But as the years have gone on, his tone has changed to much more discouraging news. He wrote about it fairly recently. So if you want to find out more about this topic, do check out skeptvet.com. So to finish off, Faith, I think you have a really fun way of talking about the pet food industry it's very similar to what the human food names are. So it's quite fun. Tell us what that is.
So I kind of refer to most of the conventional pet foods that we have here, like in the US, like Fancy Feast, Purina, what we would call the bottom of the barrel is Wall Pet.
Kind of like Walmart.
Like you can get them at Walmart.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Whereas the more bougie or boutique brands that use all the buzzwords like non-GMO, organic, and locally sourced, you can get those at Whole Pet, like Whole Foods.
I think that's quite brilliant.
Most of those places won't carry the crappy brands that I keep downstairs.
That are probably just fine for your pet, most of them.
What is fascinating is that the ingredients list, the Fancy Feast, is so much smaller than it is with these, organic, fancier brands.
And I'm guessing that some of the names you can't pronounce?
Some of the names you can't pronounce. Yeah. And I look at, I think the top 5 ingredients on the wet food I feed my cat are meat products.
Right. Well, thank you so much, Faith. It's been great chatting with you. And thank you for helping me out on a very busy week. And I hope you have a great holiday.
Thanks, you too.
Before I sign off, I want to share some really good news. Jewel has rid herself of the earring without having to have surgery. Hooray for her and our pocketbook. And even better, my lost earrings are being replaced. Richard has kindly sent me another pair, and they're on their way now. Until next time, this is Adrienne Hill.
Hi, this is Dr. Pamela Gay from Astronomy Cast. Each week, Fraser Kane and I take our listeners on a fact-based journey through the cosmos. With our weekly podcast, we explain not just what we know, but how we know what we know about this universe that we share. Check us out at astronomycast.com and look for us in iTunes, Google Play, and wherever you download podcasts. See you online.
Soon we'll be reading up this week's Trove. And this week's Trove revolves around the city of San Francisco and the paranormal, as reported in the pages of Australian newspapers. But before we get to that, here's an article that has been brought to my attention by long-time listener and supporter, Daryl Colquhoun. And this comes to us from the Age newspaper, dated the 21st of December, by Linda Morris. National Library's treasure trove under threat from budget cuts. And the key points here at the top of the article are: the National Library of Australia is facing a $13 million, or 21% cut to its operating budget from July 2023. Budget funding runs out then for Trove, the library's online portal that provides millions of Australians access to newspapers, photographs, and records. Internal report finds without dedicated and sustainable long-term funding, Trove will cease to exist. It goes on to say, federal funding for the National Library of Australia's digital resource, Trove, runs out in 6 months, and without additional government support, the popular archive could cease operations by next July. The beloved platform receives more than 22 million visits each year, most of those by me, I think, and has been caught in the same financial crunch, impacting the National Gallery of Australia, which is facing job cuts and shutdowns. In one scenario, it goes on later to say, the library would cease providing the service if no dedicated long-term funding was allocated to Trove after June. It goes on further to say, a spokesperson for the library said it required ongoing funding. Quote, the Library Council will consider all available options for Trove's future in the first half of 2023, when the government funding position beyond June 30, 2023 is clearer, end quote, they said. It has ruled out a pay-for-view scheme. That's interesting because there are other digital archives from around the world which require you to pay a subscription or pay for view or whatever the case it is. But Trove has always been free for anybody to use. A spokesperson for the Arts Minister, Tony Burke, said decisions about funding would be made in the coming months. So that's quite an alarming report there about the future, the possible future of Trove. And it's been such a big part of the Skeptic Zone over the last few years that I would be very sad indeed if that resource went away. But apart from the Skeptic Zone, of course, it is an invaluable historical archive for the rest of society. So I certainly hope that funding can be found. We'll try to keep our eye on that situation. Daryl Colquhoun also, our remarks about a Trove from last week, where we talked about crystal power and crystal healing. He says, this article from Thronka, University of New South Wales student paper, from the 11th of April 1989, read by yours truly, caught my attention because it's such an extraordinary example of mash-up and half and non-truths. I just found it interesting to analyze it. Anyway, he goes on to say, he points out certain things that they said. For example, the article said industry has long used quartz crystals as a means of focusing and transforming energy, and his comment is just plain wrong. The article says a tiny slice of quartz in a microcircuit. Daryl comments, doesn't have to be in a microcircuit. Old valve equipment used crystals. The article says, in part, increases an electric signal, and Daryl says, no. Also, when cut into precise shapes, quartz vibrates at precise rates. And Daryl says, yes, true, given an energy source. Of course, that's very important. The article says, and transforms electricity into waves. Daryl says, hard to know what that even means, which can be broadcast as in the radio and television signals. And Daryl says, the crystal, like everything else, has a resonant frequency, and that is used to lock the frequencies of oscillator circuits. You can buy these at Jaycar, and Jaycar is a popular electronics store here in Australia. So thank you, Daryl. And Daryl makes some more comments there about the article. It's nice to have some feedback. But again, we get back to the point before we get into Trove this week of the worrying news about the possible funding cuts for this valuable resource. Time once again to dive into those pages at Trove, at trove.nla.gov.au, the online resource from the Australian Government and the National Library of Australia. Chock-a-block, full to the brim with articles at your fingertips. And since I'm in the San Francisco Bay Area, I thought I would look up San Francisco Psychic, San Francisco Paranormal, San Francisco Clairvoyant, and so on, to see what has been reported over the years in the pages of Australian newspapers. And our first return comes from the year 1923, dated the 10th of August, in the Evening News from Sydney, although I notice this story has been repeated in many other newspapers. A big bequest for psychic study. San Francisco, Friday. The Leyland Stanford University has received $400,000, a bequest from the estate of the Mr. Late Thomas Welton Stanford of Melbourne, to be devoted to the furtherance of the study of psychic phenomena. Now, $400,000 in 1923 was a huge sum of money. It's a huge sum of money now, but back then it was just enormous. Now, here's a very odd story indeed from the Canberra Times, dated the 1st of May 1970.
psychic damages, a runaway sex life. And in this case, I think the word psychic is referring to the state of mind more so than the paranormal. But anyway, it's a tantalizing headline. Let's read on. San Francisco, Thursday, Australian Associated Press. A jury awarded US $50,000 damages to Gloria Sykes, the 29-year-old former Sunday school teacher to whom, an attorney alleged, a runaway cable car had given a runaway sex life. United Press International reported. The jury of 8 women and 4 men deliberated for 8 hours on the suit against San Francisco and its transport system. Miss Sykes' lawyer, Mr. Marvin Lewis, said he might appeal against the award of 1/10 of the $500,000 he was asking, but he hailed the verdict as a, quote, legal breakthrough, end quote, which established the principle of psychic damages. Miss Sykes was on a cable car in 1964 when it broke loose, plunged down a hill, and smashed into a power pole. As a result, Mr. Lewis contended in the trial she suffered from uncontrollable sex drives, which drove her into the arms of more than 100 men. Miss Sykes, who testified for 2.5 days during the trial, said she was a former Sunday school teacher and choir singer whose college friends used to kid her about being the, quote, the world's only 21-year-old virgin, end quote. Mr. Lewis said the case was difficult because of its humorous element. It was hard to get the jurors to think seriously about it. He said, everybody who talks to them feels it is a joke. What a strange story. What a strange story. Reported in 1970 about a runaway cable car here in San Francisco in 1964. And now another strange story. This is dated 1932, the 22nd of April, the Times and Northern Advertiser, Petersburg, South Australia. Einstein gets a psychic thrill. Quote, time, space, and motion. The Einstein relativity triplets took a back seat here today for emotion, the emotion of amazement and delight at a remarkable exhibition of psychic things or something equally intangible, end quote. Telegraphed the Palm Springs correspondent of the San Francisco Examiner on January 12th. Dr. and Mrs. Einstein had spent a delightful afternoon with Jean Dennis, one of America's most colorful dabblers in the things beyond. Miss Dennis, who is a fellow guest with the Einsteins at the Hotel Mirador, left the great scientist highly enthusiastic. She told me things no one possibly could know, things on which I have been working. And she demonstrated to me that she has a power to do things I cannot at this time explain. Now I must tell some of my associates about this. It was miraculous indeed, with apologies to Albert Einstein. Frau Elsa was equally worked up about the things Miss Dennis said to her on an outing to the prehistoric fish traps. Ah, how can this be? It is too much to explain, Mrs. Einstein said, shaking her head. So profound an impression was left on the physicist by the psychic that immediately after dinner Einstein again sought out Miss Dennis. Then, as if to get back to earth, the professor took out his violin and played with the El Mirador Trio. The correspondent goes on. We must have some more talks, the Einsteins declared. Miss Dennis told the correspondent, these were private talks. Dr. Einstein is indeed the most remarkable personality I have ever contacted, and his aura is just sublime, pure blue electric sparks instead of color. What a strange story, and one wonders how much of this is true. Was Albert Einstein really wowed by a psychic way back in 1932? We are left wondering I would have loved to have been a fly on the wall in that situation. And now we have another story of psychics muscling in on worried families. From 1974, the Canberra Times, dated the 22nd of April, psychics look for Miss Hurst. Hillsborough, California, Sunday, Australian Associated Press. Miss Patricia Hurst's father says that a former U.S. astronaut, Mr. Edgar Mitchell, now a psychic researcher, has volunteered to help find his daughter, Associated Press reported. The Symbionese Liberation Army, which authorities assume has abducted the newspaper heiress, has said she has joined the group. Mr. Randolph Hearst, San Francisco Examiner newspaper president and editor, said Mr. Mitchell had enlisted psychically gifted people to find and free Miss Hurst. Mr. Mitchell, an astronaut on the Apollo 14 mission, is the founder and president of the Institute of Noetic Science in Palo Alto, California, devoted to the study of consciousness. Miss Hurst's fiancé, Mr. Stephen Weed, has said in a magazine interview that Mr. Mitchell had hired 4 psychics to find Miss Hurst. The magazine report said one volunteer had been placed in a car boot and driven around for several hours with the trail ending in a cemetery. Mitchell has been interested in psychic phenomena for years, a spokesman for Mr. Hurst said. And to remind you, of course, Patty Hearst, Patricia Hearst, born in 1954, is the granddaughter of American publishing magnate William Randolph Hearst. She became known for the events following her 1974 kidnapping by the Symbionese Liberation Army. She was found and arrested 19 months after being abducted, by which time she was a fugitive wanted for serious crimes committed with members of the group. And that is a very famous story. But of course, psychics and Edgar Mitchell were of no help at all in this particular case. And finally, we'll go right back in time to the year 1888, from the Queensland Farrago and Punch. And this is on the 29th of September. Arrival of famous psychics. Mr. and Mrs. Evans, famous psychics, have just arrived in Brisbane, having been induced by the Psychological Society to come over from San Francisco. They have taken a private house in Warry Street and will probably remain with us for 2 or 3 months. Mr. Evans' particular forte is invisible slate writing, and Mrs. Evans has the reputation of being a wonderful clairvoyant. Now, my little giggle there was because slate writing is simply an old carnival trick, an old magician's trick. There's nothing special about that. As I, it says here, so whoever wrote this, as I was particularly instrumental in bringing them here, I have placed myself in the position of a detective, and my bush friends may rest confident that I will give them my impressions exactly as I receive them. If anything strikes me as being supernatural, and which I am unable to explain, I will say so. If I detect any legerdemain, and legerdemain has to do with sleight of hand, or concealment which suggests possible explanations of the phenomena, I shall be equally candid. Thus far, in my private interviews with him, Mr. Evans has favourably impressed me, and he certainly comes accredited with very wonderful testimonials. I wonder whatever happened to Mr. and Mrs. Evans, the psychics from San Francisco, who visited Australia in 1888. Well, there we are, just a few of the many references to the paranormal, the psychic, the strange, the mysterious, and so on, and San Francisco, as reported in the pages of Australian newspapers. And of course, there's much more for you to peruse. If you go to Trove at trove.nla.gov.au, type in your search criteria, and you never know what you might find.
Thank you for listening to the Skeptic Zone podcast. This has been the last Skeptic Zone for 2022. And next year, we start it all over again. And the only reason I can start it all over again year after year is through, via, and with the generous support of people just like you at Patreon or PayPal. And you can chip into the Skeptic Zone or donate at skepticzone.tv. And if it wasn't for people doing that, well, this would be the last episode of the Skeptic Zone. And I want to find out what happens next week. I don't know about you. As you heard in the Trove segment, we hope that the Trove itself can be rescued and keep going, as I find it to be an invaluable resource. And I know millions of other people do, as reported in that segment. Let's do what we can. I certainly do what I can to spread the word of Trove. It's such a great place to visit. And a big thank you to all my reporters, no matter where you are around the world, from the northern wastelands of frozen Canada to the balmy beaches of the south coast of Australia, where reporter Michelle Bickersma is enjoying a little time off, and even to Newcastle, just north of Sydney, where we hope soon, very soon, to hear from Maynard. Maybe Maynard has a Christmas message for us. Let's wait and see. But for this week and for this year, this is Richard Saunders signing off from the Bay Area, San Francisco.
You've been listening to the Skeptic Zone podcast. Please visit our website at www.skepticzone.tv for show notes, contacts, and to access the back catalogue of episodes going back to 2008. You can follow the Skeptic Zone podcast on Twitter at Skeptic Zone, visit our Facebook page, or leave a review on iTunes. You can also support the Skeptic Zone via Patreon or PayPal. The Skeptic Zone podcast is an independent production. The views and opinions expressed on the Skeptic Zone are not necessarily those of Australian skeptics or any other skeptical organisation.
Hiya, Maynard here, wishing you a happy Christmas. I've got some things that have arrived as CDs, which I'm listening to. One of my Patreons got me. And by the way, spoil Richard for Patreon Christmas this year. I've got one called Christmas Cocktails Part 3. I'll be listening to that once or twice. And, one thing that did come, I haven't even opened it yet because I've been too busy doing stupid Christmas stuff I don't want to do, is the Voice of the Beehive remaster finally arrived. I mentioned it on the Christmas show. It's a remastered and extended version, double CD of their album Let It Be that originally came out around about 87, 88. Oh, Don't Call Me Baby, I Walk the Earth, a great album. From Woody, drummer from Madness, was in there with Melissa and Tracy. Voice of the Beehive. That's just out and remastered and well worth a listen. I wish you a very Merry Christmas and a very pleasant New Year. Also, I'm just about to go and do anything that's got nothing to do with Christmas and have a good time and enjoy the Skeptic Zone and think of Richard when it comes to your Patreon time, everybody. Look, I'll just play you a Christmas song before I go. Another Christmas thing to do.